This morning, we are in for a wonderful experience. Our speaker, Mr. Enrique Brito, he's a partner and practice leader of corporate advisory service at Tatum, which is a national executive advisory firm. He's helped many middle market businesses by advising owners on how to maximize and harvest business value through the implementation of growth strategies, and transition plans. Enrique has over 25 years of corporate finance and investment banking experience. Prior to joining Tatum, he was a partner and senior managing director at the McLean Group, which is a national investment bank headquartered out of Washington. Today, he'll be sharing his insights on negotiation and the art in the M&A deal. Ladies and gentlemen, with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Enrique Brito.
Thank you. Good morning. One of my favorite stories about negotiation involves the 1912 presidential campaign of Theodore Roosevelt. And at the time, they were planning to distribute 3 million pamphlets with a copy of a campaign speech as well as the photographs of Roosevelt. And just a couple of days before they were going to send out the pamphlets, the campaign manager realized that they hadn't asked for permission of the photographer to use the photographs. So at the time, the copyright law enabled the photographer to recover up to $1 per photograph. So this meant $3 million back in 1912, which in today's dollars is about $60 million. So the campaign manager had several options. Either they could negotiate a more reasonable price with the photographer, or they can just dump the pamphlets and reprint them again, which would delay marketing the campaign. So the campaign manager just came up with a negotiation strategy, and he sent a telegraph to the photographer basically saying this: 3 million copies, we're planning to distribute 3 million copies of a pamphlet with a campaign speech and photographs. Excellent opportunity for photographers, and we have thought of you as the photographer for our pamphlets. How much would you be willing to pay us to use your photographs? Please respond immediately. Well, not long after that, the photographer responded, I'm very flattered by the opportunity, but I can only afford $250. So in an instant, the campaign manager turned a situation that was a losing proposition, $3 million, to one where both sides were winning. This story illustrates many of the principles that I'm going to share with you today in how to put together negotiation strategies. Is a process of understanding the other side's needs, what are your alternatives to negotiation, and especially how you put together a negotiation strategy that would allow you to get into a situation where both parties you know that will actually live up to their commitments. In negotiation, the biggest advantage that you can gain begins even before you sit down to negotiate. It's in the preparation. And actually, Dwight Eisenhower said that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable because it forces you to study the terrain and come up with a strategy to gain an advantage. And many of the strategies, principles, and tactics that I'm going to share with you, I have learned over many years of doing this, working on both sides of the table. And I'm a big believer in the Pareto principle. So I'm always asking myself, what is the 20% that leads to the 80% of the result? And that's what I have included in the presentation, is that 20% of factors in negotiation that lead to an 80% outcome of a successful negotiation. So when we look at the agenda for today, first I'm going to explore the 3 principles that underlie successful negotiation. These are the principles that you need to master to become a good negotiator. The first one involving the right mindset, followed by the right process, and then the right execution. And then later on in the presentation, I will share with you how some of these principles apply to M&A negotiation and what are some of the best practices that we use in M&A to get to a deal where we will know that both parties are satisfied and that the agreement will hold through the test of time. So when we look at negotiation, we always begin with the right mindset. And the right mindset requires foundation of two beliefs. The first one is that everything is negotiable. And this is something that we need to instill in ourselves because our culture discourages negotiation. Everything has a printed price as a way to discourage negotiation. And in fact, there are cultures where negotiation is not only expected but encouraged. Well, but we live in a society that is not the case. So we are not brought up with the belief that everything should be negotiable. When I see a price, and this is something that I have to learn, when I see a price, I see a preference, not something that is written in stone. When I see an asking price, whether that involves something in the supermarket or involves a $250 million deal, I'm looking at a preference and an invitation to negotiate. And we will learn what are some of the key principles in terms of negotiation, and it's not about price. Because whenever you're focusing the negotiation on just one factor, you're actually doing yourself the favor because that is not negotiation, that's haggling. It's a zero-sum game. When you're negotiating just on price, someone will get more of it and someone will get less of it. And that is a very disadvantageous way of negotiating. So one of the first thing that you need to instill in yourself is the belief that everything is negotiable. And you need to believe this. And you need to practice this every single day by always asking yourself, is there a better deal? Whether you're buying something in the supermarket, whether you're buying a car, or whether you're doing an M&A transaction. You need to ask yourself, is there a better way to do this? The other key belief that you need to instill in yourself is that there will always be a better deal if you ask. If you don't ask, you have 100% no already given to you. And if you ask, you at least have 50-50 probability of getting a yes. So it behooves you to actually always ask, is there a better deal? Every time that I check into a hotel, I ask, is there a better room that I can get? Every time that I go into the supermarket, I ask myself, is there a better deal that I can get today? Every time that I buy a shirt, I ask the person in the cash register, do you have a sale? And it's not because of how much money I'm saving. It's because to instill in me the fact and to remind me the fact that everything is negotiable and that prices are only a preference. This suggested manufacturing price that every single item has is actually a very clever psychological trick that is played on you. It's called the anchoring effect, and I'll get into that later on. So the right mindset in terms of negotiation begins with these two beliefs. The next thing that we need to consider in terms of the right mindset is that negotiation should be considered a process of convergence. It's more of a conversation rather than an argument. And it's a process of convergence because if you know not just your needs for the negotiation, but also the other side's needs, this process has to converge to an agreement where the agreement is actually fulfilling the needs of both sides. That's why it is called the process of convergence. Now, there is something very important to realize, and that is that there are two types of negotiation. One is called the distributed negotiation, which is you have a fixed pie that is going to be divided up. Whenever you're negotiating on just one item, one factor, whether that is price, whether that is length of the contract or what have you, you're doing what is called the distributed negotiation. You're just slicing up a fixed pie. And that is a zero-sum game. That is the situation that you need to avoid in most negotiations, because you need to go from there to what is called an integrative negotiation, which is the other type of negotiation. It's more of a synergistic negotiation where you actually, what you do is that you enlarge the pie. You ever heard the term win-win negotiation? The first time I heard it, I said, well, yeah, that is nice, but it's still like, too amorphous of a concept for me to put my arms around. I never understood what win-win negotiation meant. Of course, I know that both sides need to win, but how do you get there? Until I realized the difference between these two types of negotiation, when you're negotiating just on one issue that becomes a zero-sum game, or when you're bringing several issues at once in a negotiation, where every side is well aware of what are the issues that they want to get out of the negotiation and in what order, and you use that to trade with the other side to enlarge the pie. That's what a win-win negotiation means. And when we are negotiating, for instance, an M&A transaction, it's not about price. It's about price, terms, and conditions. And when we're negotiating, when I'm preparing to negotiate, these are the things that I'm looking at. Is price the most important aspect of the negotiation? Okay? If I'm working on the sales side, many times it's about a business owner retiring. But many times it's not about the amount of money. It's about transferring the legacy. It's about making sure that the business that they have created for the past 20 years survives the next generation. It's about making sure that they can have a succession plan in place so that their dream survives. So it has nothing to do with price. It has everything to do with the business surviving. That is the thing that I need to determine when I begin working with a client. And this is the funny things. Rarely, they will tell you the real reason. They will tell you the reason that sounds good. They will not tell you the real reason why they're selling. This is something that you need to investigate by asking the right questions. Part of the job of investment banking is being half of a psychologist, as opposed to corporate finance. When I began doing investment banking many years ago, I thought it was 80% corporate finance and 20% marketing and 20% something else. It doesn't work that way. It's 80% marketing, 20% corporate finance, and within the marketing you need to know what are called psychographics, which is the reason why people do things. That's where psychology comes in. Part of the art of putting together an M&A deal involves that every single deal is different. Okay? Every single transaction that I have participated in is different. The elements come into play in a different way. That's what the art of negotiation is. But there is also a science to negotiation, which I will share with you in the presentation. There are many aspects of how we think and how people react that you need to take into consideration when you're negotiating with someone. Okay? And we'll talk about cognitive biases later on. We're going to talk about also, in terms of the types of negotiation, whenever you're dealing in a distributed negotiation, which is one aspect of it, which is a zero-sum game, this is something that you need to be careful with. When we are under stress, we go automatically into what is called System 1 thinking. Okay? This is the science of negotiation. The System 1 thinking is what is controlled by what is called the amygdala, which is part of the automatic response that we have when we are under threat. Okay? This is what has allowed us to survive for so many years. It's part of what is called the limbic system, okay? Which is responsible for the flight or fight response. When we are confronted with a threat, the brain floods the system with adrenaline and cortisol. Okay? And also as a result, it inhibits the prefrontal cortex. So we are not thinking logically. Okay? When we are under stress, we are resorting to what is called heuristics, which are rules of thumb, and we're resorting to models of automatic behavior. So in negotiation, if you are in one of these distributed negotiations where it's a zero-sum game, and you can tell me that you can do this without stress, I take my hat off to you. Okay? Because these are very stressful situations, and under stress, you're not thinking logically. You're not thinking with your prefrontal cortex. You're using your limbic system. This is what, by the way, this is what has allowed us to survive for so many years. Okay? If we were confronted with a lion, the brain needed a mechanism to inhibit thinking. Because if you start thinking, this is where the lion is coming, this is where I'm going, and this is their speed, and this is how much I'm going to run to outrun, or this is the tree that I'm going to go up to avoid the lion, you're done. You're done. The survival mechanism that was created is that the limbic system shuts off the prefrontal cortex, which is our logical part. So we don't think. We are not allowed to think in those situations. It's the fight or flight response, which has allowed us to survive. But that means that every time that you are in a stressful situation that you haven't practiced and you haven't prepared for, you're going to be operating from system 1 thinking as opposed to system 2 thinking. Have you ever heard the saying, we drill for a skill because under stress we regress? That's what it captures. Okay? It captures that we need to prepare and rehearse to habituate ourselves to situations so that the stress that they produce is minimal, and that we can now afford to use our system 2 thinking, prefrontal cortex, to respond to the situation. This is what astronauts do. They drill the same type of very stressful situation, life and death situation, time and time again, so that it becomes habitual. This allows them to use system 2 thinking to get themselves out of a bind. Same thing with M&A transactions. I mean, if someone tells me that negotiating a $300 million deal is like nothing to them and they are not under stress in a negotiation where most of the time in middle market M&A, boutique investment banking, most of your entire year compensation is tied to that deal. If you tell me that you are not under stress to get the deal done, you're superhuman, because you will be under stress. And I still remember I was sick to my stomach. The very first deal that I did, okay, I was a total wreck. I mean, of course, it didn't show, but inside, I was totally going nuts. Of course, after you do it time and time again, after you practice and practice and practice, and you habituate yourself to the situation, now you can negotiate these deals with a lot more calmness. And then again, you start using system 2 thinking. So that is part of what the science of negotiations involve, and where the science comes into M&A. Okay? Remember this, practice. And you practice by, as I said, instilling in you those 2 beliefs that everything is negotiable and there is always a better deal if you ask, because that's where it begins, and you start doing it every day. So you start habituating yourself to hearing no. You start habituating yourself to looking for alternatives. And you start habituating yourself to preparing to negotiate. Those are keys. So with regard to interest versus position, this is another very important concept that I want to share with you. This is part of that 20% responsible for the 80% of the results. In every negotiation, what you want represents your interest in the position. I want $5 million for the transaction, or I want a financing that is no longer than 3 years. That's what you want. It's your position going into the negotiation. Interest, on the other hand, responds to the why you want what you want. Why do you want a $5 million transaction? Okay. Well, that is how much I think it will allow me to live comfortably for the next 30 years. Why do you want the loan to be at least 3 years? Well, because given the cash flow of my company, that's what I think we will be able to repay. And 3 years from now, I have all these other plans that would allow me to pay back the loan and continue growing. It is the why you want what you want that gives you the position. There is a very illustrative story about the difference between interest and position, and this actually comes from a book called Getting to Yes from Roger Fisher and William Ury of the Harvard Negotiating Project. And it involves 2 sisters that are quarreling over an orange. Of course, when you only have one aspect of negotiation, what is the best outcome? Well, the best outcome is a compromise, where you decide how you're going to divvy up whatever you're negotiating. Well, in the case of the orange The sisters ended up splitting the orange in half, so each one got a half. Not realizing that one of the sisters wanted the orange for baking, so she only needed the peel, and the other one needed the orange for juice. So if they would have understand their needs, their interest going into the negotiation, then they would have won. They would have actually grown the pie. That's what I mean, growing the pie, a synergistic negotiation. They both would have ended up with entire orange, one for the peel, the other one for the juice. So in every negotiation, as I said, there will be positions, which is what you want and what the other side wants, and there will be interest associated with those positions that you need to determine. And that will be part of your preparation process.